Welcome back to the Taiwan Outlook. I'm Raymond Wu. We're continuing our discussion with Mr. Alan Romberg, and we're going to talk about U.S.-China relations in this segment. Alan, people often say that U.S.-China relations today is possibly the single most important bilateral relationship in the world, compared to any others. Would you agree with such an assessment? And also, if that's the case, how would you think the relationship will evolve under President Obama?
I hesitate to say the most important relationship, but let's put it this way. I don't know any that's more important.
Okay.
How will it evolve? I think at heart it will evolve in a positive way.
Okay.
As I read both what the Chinese leadership is saying and what Mr. Obama is saying and I'm quite sure believes, is that for the United States and for China to resolve problems that are critical to each of them, they've got to work together. There are issues in the world today that if the U.S. and China don't cooperate, won't get resolved at all. Climate change, a number of energy issues, environment.
North Korea. Yeah.
There are specific issues of North Korea. I think that China's cooperation, for example, at the United Nations is really quite critical on questions like Sudan. I think Iran, which could become a really serious issue under the Obama administration, there's an important UN role here, and therefore China's role is really quite critical. If you look at the statements that have been made by Chinese leaders, meet with them, talk with them, it's very obvious that they want this relationship to go well. Are there issues in the relationship, problems? Of course there are. And some of them are the kinds of issues you have in any relationship, trade problems or things of that sort. Obviously, there are some special problems in the relationship, including Taiwan. But I think that over the last several years, what you've seen is management by both Washington and Beijing of policies, not coordination or collaboration of policies, but with a shared objective of maintaining peace and stability. I think that the Obama policy toward China and toward Taiwan will be very consistent in this regard. I don't see any inclination to strike out in a new direction. When Obama sent his letter to then President-elect Ma Ying-jeou, he was very clear in being supportive of Mr. Ma's cross-strait policy, for example.
Yes.
When President Bush approved arms sales for Taiwan, Obama supported that and said he didn't see an inconsistency between arms sales and the dialogue.
Yes.
So on this very problematic issue, I think the approach is going to be one which certainly he believes is consistent with also a very positive and constructive relationship with China around the world in bilateral relations of various sorts. And I have no question whatsoever that he intends to make sure that relationship continues to move in a positive direction.
Yeah, but people often say that the problem with U.S.-China relationship is that there may be a lot of common interests. For example, the issues that you mentioned, the climate change, specific issues like Sudan and North Korea. But also, the problem lies in the bilateral relationship because there isn't a foundation of common values. Specifically referred to the issues, values like human rights, free market economy, and more internationally accepted, values. Would you think that those controversies will cast, somewhat of a shadow over the bilateral ties under President Obama? Well, the Democratic president and his administration, bring up those issues from time to time, just to exert pressure on Beijing. Or would that just, go away slowly because of the further integration of the two countries from economy to political relations?
I don't think these issues will go away, but I also don't think that they're likely, unless something horrendous happens.
Yes.
I don't think they're likely to cast a big shadow on the relationship. One thing that's happened over the last several decades is that the United States and China have come to understand that this issue is very important to the United States.
Yes.
It's also very important to China. We have a dialogue that goes on. Sometimes it's been interrupted. But I think what's happened is that the two countries have gotten themselves in a position where it doesn't affect the overall relationship when they have disagreements on this. Now, there's a special case right now that I think Beijing is very nervous about, and that has to do with the Dalai Lama. As we know, the 50th anniversary of the Tibetan uprising comes this March, and it's very evident from statements being made by Chinese leaders that they are very concerned that the United States not get itself involved, and they're suspicious and they worry, and there's the Congress and their advocates in the United States. And I think their focus at this point is on the Obama administration to try to make sure that it doesn't make this a central focus of their own concern.
Yes.
I don't think it will. I don't think the issue is going to go away.
No.
But I don't think it's going to somehow dominate the relationship unless, again, there's some horrendous event that takes place. Obviously, Americans would say, well, an important part of this is how Beijing deals with the Tibetan issue, how it deals with the Dalai Lama. I think most Americans feel that Beijing hasn't dealt all that well with him.
No.
And so I think there will be some urging to change that. But it obviously is an issue which also has profound implications for stability in the PRC. And so I think that PRC leaders, Chinese leaders, will be interested in hearing what the U.S. has to say, but they're obviously going to make their decision based on how they see issues of stability and national interest. And but I still don't think that those issues are likely to, unless something gets out of hand, I don't think it's going to overshadow the relationship and knock it off course. But I have to say, as a general matter, I think American foreign policy is most successful when it combines promotion of its values with promotion of its other interests. I think promoting values is an interest, but you've got to keep it in balance.
They're not necessarily mutually exclusive.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. If you pay too much attention to any one aspect, then you can knock it off balance and cause trouble. I don't sense at all that that's likely to be the case in an Obama administration.
Okay. But in the words of former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, the U.S.-China relationship is very complex. Some parts are good, some parts are not so good. Given that, and also with the global financial crisis in the background, would you think that this gives the occasion for China to assume the position as being a quote-unquote responsible stakeholder in international affairs?
I think China intends to be a responsible stakeholder in international affairs. Obviously, that means to Beijing not only that it should do things to contribute to international peace and stability and prosperity, but also that people should listen to Chinese views. Having said that, I don't think it's a situation in which China assumes that it should be calling all the shots. I think it feels it should be dealt with on a respectful basis. It has a lot of clout these days. It plays a big role. And I think, for example, on the international financial issues, China is seeking to play a very responsible role. It's one that also, of course, serves Chinese interests, but at the same time, I think it also serves international interests. So, yeah, I think that China does have the aspiration to do that. The United States hopes it will do that, going back into the Bush administration and Mr. Zellick's well-known speech. So partially it's a matter of definition of what a responsible stakeholder is. But yeah, I think that the U.S. does look to China to play that role and assume those responsibilities.
Yeah. If you look at Washington's policy and position towards Beijing in the last few years, people often say that there is a combination of tactics of both engagement and also hedge, just because the fact that there are so many uncertainties and variables in the relationship, like many others. So would you think that under President Obama and his, administration, that this, combination of both engagement and hedge will continue, in the conduct of relations towards China?
I think that combination will continue both on the part of the United States and on the part of China. There are uncertainties on both sides. And the hedging mostly comes, I think, in case of military preparations. And it's not, there are a lot of people in the United States who now say, well, we shouldn't talk about hedging because it seems like it's confrontational. And even though we need to be prepared, we shouldn't talk about it in those terms because it bothers China. I don't fully share those views, but I respect them. But the point is, even when talking about hedging, the way you characterized it is, I think, exactly right. That is, it is a hedge against uncertainty.
Yes.
It's not a hedge because China is an enemy
yes.
or whatever.
Okay.
But I do think that one needs to recognize that just as it's a unique relationship in the sense that we're both reaching out as best we can to have a constructive and cooperative and close relationship on the one hand, we also are taking steps in case things don't work out to be able to handle our own interests, and it's being done by both sides.
So it's not just Washington doing that towards Beijing.
It's not. And let me add one more thing, if I may, on this, Raymond.
Yes.
One of the things I think is most important here is that there remains a very significant degree of what I would call strategic suspicion, mutual strategic suspicion. And I think it is very important that both sides work to try to reduce that to the extent possible. It isn't going to be eliminated. But I think that on the Chinese side, there is suspicion that the United States seeks to, if not contain China in the old Soviet Cold War sense, nonetheless limit its power and reach. And on the American side, I think there is a suspicion or a concern that China, over the longer term, is seeking to not only limit American power, especially in East Asia, but actually to push us away. Excuse me. I think we need to work to address those issues. I think we need to talk about, and by saying talk about, I mean at various levels, including at the summit level,
of course,
what our own vision for the future is on both sides, what our concerns are, what our hopes are, and how we might address those issues so that we can indeed reduce those areas of suspicion between us.
Yeah, Alan just mentioned there are some very specific issues and problems in U.S.-China relations, and Taiwan is one of them. And when we come back after a short break, we're going to discuss the U.S. policy towards cross-strait. We'll be back.